Welcome to the Squared Circle Pit with your host, Rob Pasbani.
Now entering the Squared Circle Pit, have a fellow podcaster. You might know him as the host of Defiant Ones, the DEFY Wrestling podcast. DEFY Wrestling is based out of Seattle, and the longest running heavy metal show in Seattle on the radio, 99.9 KISW. Metal Shop is the show. Welcome, Kevin Diers. Thank you for entering the pit.
Man, I feel like I have such a one of the parasocial relationship with you because I've been listening to you for years. I listened to Nitro, the Knotfest. Knitro, is that what it's called?
Knitro is the official name. Yes.
Listen to that. Watch so many of your read the column for so long, and it's a pleasure to be here, man. Awesome.
Well, thank you. That's great to hear. Love a fellow rock and wrestling head. Obviously, I could see your credentials already with your backdrops with Sleep and Megadeth, and being a fan of DEFY. You know, you really have to be into pro wrestling to be into DEFY. It's not just a casual thing, I feel, you know. So as I ask all of my guests when we start, what did you get into first? Was it rock or pro wrestling?
It was pro wrestling. And it's kind of funny. I wasn't really into wrestling first. I was into action figures, and my uncle had all the LJNs and like the big bendies that you could basically like bash your brother or sister with because they were so you could use those things as freaking weapons. But so I would go to my uncle's house in Pennsylvania, my grandma's house, and she would let me play with these LJNs. And one time we were watching WrestleMania 2 on VHS, and I got to, kind of see what I was actually playing with the figures, and that got me hooked, man. Not like the best WrestleMania ever, but when you're a little kid, like anything with these huge dudes to just get you stoked. And then so WrestleMania 2, and then years later it was just flipping through the channels as a kid, and I think The Undertaker is what really kind of made me stop on the channels. I think he was wrestling just like a chop guy on a episode of Raw, and I was just like, totally taken in by Undertaker and this crazy looking demon.
Interesting. So you got in a little later to wrestling, like you mentioned with the figures, but it was really once you were a little older that you started following it regularly. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say maybe like 10 years old. So I wouldn't say like older, but like, about 10 or 11 is when I really got into it. And then, it was just all guns blazing from there. I would, save up my $2.50 allowance and go and buy like wrestling magazines. You grew
up in the Northwest?
I grew up in the Northwest. Yep. In a town called Kent, Washington. It's like a suburb of Seattle. And, we couldn't afford pay-per-view, so we would do this really kind of bootleg thing where we would just like watch scrambled pay-per-view and like listen to it. So it's basically like predating podcasts.
Yeah,
you'd catch like 10-second clip of a video maybe like every hour. Go, woo! Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, I guess the hot boxes didn't reach Seattle.
My friend got one of those years later, and we got to watch everything, man. We would have, ECW parties, WCW, WWF. That was awesome. But yeah, I wasn't able to jerry rig one of those myself.
I didn't have, I mention this on the show all the time, but I didn't have, my building itself wasn't wired for cable until 96. So I would have to annoy my friends to tape pay-per-views because they lived in, a zip code or two over where it was wired for cable. And so they would have it, and that's, or I'd have to watch it, 2 months later on tape.
And you were in New York City, right?
Yeah, in Brooklyn. Just cable wasn't as widely accessible until the mid 90s, I guess. It was very, very odd. Like I guess I could have gotten a dish, but I could not. My building was just not wired for it until much later. And so with growing up in the Seattle area, I imagine rock music is just everywhere. At the time of your coming up, I feel like you were probably starting to, like when you were like around 10 or so, I'm guessing that's like just as like the grunge movement is getting off the ground and everything. So I'm sure you were like right there on at ground zero, so to speak. For
absolutely. I mean, you mentioned at the top of the interview the rock station that I work at, KISW, that I do Metal Shop on. they were like the first station to really like break bands. Like my friend Kathy was the first person to play Pearl Jam on the radio ever. And so like Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Nirvana, obviously Soundgarden, all those bands were just like baked into the everywhere. It was like every kid, had the bowl cut and the baggy jeans and the Soundgarden t-shirt at my school. I remember seeing the KISW logo. It was just the word rock in this font. Before I even knew it was a radio station, was just like, it was just like a logo. I was like, oh, it's just rock music. But yeah, it's just everywhere, and even, smaller bands. Like I remember loving MXPX and they were a Northwest band and just like, yeah, heavy and punk, and just so much of it was baked into, being a kid here in the Northwest for sure.
So who are your favorite bands?
Then or now?
Let's do both. Yeah, back then and right now.
Back then, I was really into, punk music and I was really into like NoFX, MXPX, skate punk, Pennywise. And then I got really into like new metal. I was really into Korn. I liked POD for a while, really liked POD. And then I got into like metal and hardcore. And so my first entrance into that was like through Victory Records, through a compilation CDs, and I got really into Hatebreed, and still one of my favorite bands. My favorite band from the Northwest is a band that I'm representing right now. They're called Denial of Life. They're like a thrash kind of crossover hardcore band, really awesome. But yeah, still love Hatebreed. Yeah, my favorite new record though is this band from Portland called Vitriol. Super sick, kind of tech death, but just like really awesome shredding stuff. So yeah, Vitriol.
Cool. It sounds like the Northwest has a pretty healthy scene going right now, right? There's plenty of plenty of shows to catch and plenty of venues and all that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. Yeah, and so I love that you're on the radio. I'm a big radio head. No pun intended. But how did you get involved with broadcasting? How did you get on the radio? How did you go from listening to the radio to getting on the radio?
So when I was younger and in Kent, we got the signal for this college radio station called KGRG. It was a lot of like skate punk, ska, punk, hardcore metal. I mean, it was a free range college station, but their format was today's rock. And so it was just be like, independent bands. And it was a small signal, but in that suburb, we got it great, crisp. And so I would listen to that all the time. I really didn't have any aspirations with radio other than being on that station. That's just what I wanted to do. Is like, I think in like New Jersey, they have Seton Hall, WSOU, I think it is, pirate radio. That's like their metal station. It was like that, but less metal, but it was just students runs. It was super awesome institution here. Nirvana actually played a concert at their college in like 89. So yeah, man, I went and I studied there at KGRG. I started a specialty show called Dead Air, which is not an original name. It's a super unoriginal name, but it's this show.
At the time, you thought you were really clever, though. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Like, oh, I got it.
I got it. Hardcore radio show. And believe it or not, like 20 years later, the show is still going on. My friend Trevor still hosts that show. So that's like something I'm proud of, is that the show lives on beyond me, right? But as far as getting into, big signal commercial radio, so the show Metal Shop has been around for like 40 plus years. And I grew up listening to it. Never thought I would ever host it. There's, Saturday nights, you would just be partying and listening to Metal Shop. That's where you heard your metal. And in 2010, me and my best friend Ian, we hosted Dead Air. And the hosts at the time, Kevin and Steve, who we'd listen to every week, they announced that they're leaving Metal Shop. They just wanted their Saturday nights back. It wasn't any bad blood. They just wanted to camp and do things other than be up there at Saturday night. So they announced that they were going to do a be the next host of Metal Shop contest, and there were like 150 applicants, and you just had to make a playlist, and give them a tape of your stuff. You had to go in for an interview. We were whittled down to like the top 3 candidates. We went on air, and the next week we won the show. They called us up live on air and said, "You're the next host of Metal Shop." And we were like drinking at my house, and were just like stage diving on the couch, like freaking out. We just won this show that we grew up listening to. It's like one of those oh shit moments. And then the next week, so like 1 week we're winning the show, the next week we're doing the show for the first time, and the week after that we're introducing Slayer live in front of an audience. Like it was like a rock star, like that Mark Wahlberg rock star moment where you're just like, oh, okay, right into the deep end. It was badass. So that was 2010, and been able to hang on and keep doing the show. And it's an honor and a privilege to be able to keep like this institution alive and keep going, man. It's really cool to be the host of this show that people grew up listening. There's guys that say that they grew up listening like in the early 90s to this show, and they have tapes of the old days and stuff, and still rocking with it. So it's cool.
That's cool, man. And I love it. Yeah, like I had the same thing in college. My college had a radio station that barely broadcast to the school. Like I think you could only listen to it in the cafeteria, but my friends and I were totally hooked on it. And it was such a fun experience. Radio is really kind of a dying art, I feel, or a lost art nowadays. But conversely, while radio is dying, I think podcasting has really bloomed and blossomed. And now, like right now we're podcasting. And I think it's so cool how equipment has become so reasonable that basically anybody can just up and start broadcasting and have an audience.
If their microphone doesn't sound like butt, that is, we spent like 2 minutes fumbling with my audio because it's just like the bad feedback. But you're totally right, man. And it's interesting during the pandemic, everyone started a podcast, right? And it was interesting to see who kept with it, because it's a grind, man. And unless you're like already famous, you're not going to get an already, you're not going to get a built-in audience. You got to really just like be consistent. The consistency is the grind. And, you've been consistent. So,
oh, well, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, like I mentioned, you do the DEFY podcast. So
yes.
When did your wrestling fandom get from just watching the mainstream stuff to like going underground and seeking out, underground wrestling and really having to find stuff? And how did you find DEFY?
I got into like non-WWF and WCW wrestling through looking at, and this was what initially got me into it as a kid, was seeing the bloody ads of ECW in magazines. And I was like, I love this. And I've never seen a match. And so I had to track it down. And my friend Kenny, he started like tape trading. And so he would get these ECW tapes, but then along with those, he would get independent tapes. He would just get these like really like third generation grainy Japanese tapes of death matches. We were just getting into, and we didn't really know anything about them. So it was just like, oh, what's this tape? Oh, let's write these things down and then research them when we could go to the library on 56K dial-up internet. And just like, we had like a binder of research that we thought that like all of these things on the internet are going to disappear one day. We must like maintain all of this knowledge in our binders. And we would, it's so ridiculous going back to it. But yeah, man, that's what got me into it. And then I found out that, we could wrestle in our backyard. And so I did backyard wrestling. And then that got me even deeper into knowing that, there was like these local companies, and it wasn't what it is now, but it was just very, very local, kind of low budget indie wrestling in the like late 90s here in Seattle and Tacoma area. And I went to some of those, and the story is the same with so many people. I got out of wrestling for a little while. I got more into like drinking and music and girls. And then what really got me back into wrestling was CM Punk and the Pipe Bomb. And that just like brought me back in because it just like, because, straight edge hardcore guy talking about Ring of Honor and New Japan. I was just like, okay, all the things are back in, like, it was totally in alignment to my interests. And started going to more WWF shows. And then I just became more aware of, obviously with access to internet being what it is now, I just got way more into it, got into Ring of Honor. And then I recognized that there was this company here in Seattle called 321 Battle. And it was kind of like a punk rock wrestling. It was like half vaudeville, goofy, but like there were some like really amazing wrestlers, some really violent matches, and it was really fun. And that's what sparked my interest in really like getting into independent wrestling. I got to see some people like Shotzi Blackheart wrestled there, Ricky Shane Page wrestled there, Tim Thatcher wrestled there, Colt Cabana, and yeah, and so that got me really into indie wrestling. And then 7 years ago, DEFY Wrestling started, and the first main event was headlined by Cody Rhodes versus Shane Strickland, Swerve. And so it was just, and this was really before Swerve was like who he is now. He's huge now. But that was like right when Cody was starting to hit the indies. And then Davey Richards came out and, laid down like a basically said, "Hey, I want the title. Let's build this thing." And then I've been along for the ride. I've basically I was friends with the guy who started it. His name is Jim. Him and this guy Matt started it, and I just did anything I could. I would take photos, do social media, backstage interviewing, things like that, and just fell in love with it, and tried to help out wherever I could.
That's all, and that's really how it goes. It's like you just stick around, and if there's any work, you agree to do it, and then eventually you find you find your spot.
Utility player, exactly. Just kind of volunteering until eventually it might pay off. The pandemic really brought about the podcast, though, because obviously we couldn't join together and wrestle. We couldn't go to these monthly events. And so I kind of just thought, hey, what if we talked to these wrestlers and caught up with them? Because, a lot of them are, kind of just figuring out for themselves. Everyone was in this weird time where we couldn't, I wanted this fan base not to forget the awesome times that we were having. And I didn't really want to lose any momentum because we were like all guns blazing, and then it just came to a grinding halt. So we started the podcast on the Patreon, and it first started as audio only. And then it went into, video with like a crappy webcam that I had. And then now it's like, a 2 or 3 camera shot, pro audio, pro video. It's like they really invested in that, and we've grown it, and we're about to launch season 2. We got like 16 episodes going. We got like Joey Janela, Effie, some really Masha Slamovich, some fun episodes that are coming. And it's been exciting to watch it grow alongside DEFY. So
that's awesome. Yeah, and you mentioned CM Punk. Of course, Punk is very much in the news. It's been a busy week. Did you happen to catch the Royal Rumble or
absolutely
see what happened? It was a pretty interesting show. Personally, I thought that the Women's Rumble was more exciting than the Men's Rumble, just in terms of the whole hour, just how it flowed. I thought the Men's Rumble in the middle was a little uneventful, and then it started out hot with Jimmy and Jay, and then nothing was really happening until like the last 20 minutes or so, when like Cody and Punk and Drew McIntyre and all of them came in. That's when I feel like it really started picking up. And I loved the last 5 minutes with Cody and Punk. And then it was crazy because people that night were speculating that it looked like Punk hurt himself just based on how he was holding his arm. And sure enough, he's back out. He's out of WrestleMania. What were your thoughts on the Rumble and the Punk injury?
Man, I had a lot of fun with the Rumble. I was kind of gunning for Gunther, no pun intended. I really would. I thought how cool it would be to see him like win that Rumble. The Women's Rumble I'm a big fan of Jordan Grace, so it was so cool to see that moment, and it was like that was really awesome. I thought that Naomi, she kind of did the like Cody Rhodes, Drew McIntyre thing where you have to like kind of leave for them to see how important you can be, how sometimes, when you start at a place at a low level, they'll only see you at that level. So then you got to go out there and prove that you're worth something. And she came back, and it was really cool to see. The Men's Rumble I thought was a lot of fun. I always loved the Rumble. It was kind of maybe a little bit, it kind of like drudged on a little bit there in the middle. I was happy to see Cody win. I was surprised to see Cody win. I think that all kind of threw, at least me and my friend that I was watching it with, it kind of threw us for a little bit of a curveball because, with the Roman thing, Roman and The Rock, we assumed that they were going to be wrestling. And then so now Cody's in there, and it's now back to that story. The CM Punk thing is just it's such a bummer, man. Snake bitten. Like,
Yeah.
he comes back and any other wrestler couldn't have made this work, but like he was like so many people were down on him through the way that things ended at AEW, but he comes back and it just seemed like he totally babyface and people were loving it and really stoked that he could come back and, come home, as he says, and have that main event at WrestleMania. And then, first match, that was his second match, first televised match.
He had 2 matches with Dominic Mysterio over the Christmas break at house shows in LA and New York.
But yeah, first like big, televised match for CM Punk back, and he's hurt. It's like, man, I mean, that was really emotional for him to bring up Chad Gilbert from Newfound Glory on Raw about his cancer diagnosis and treatment. It's like, that was a really special thing. The thing about CM Punk is like, I'm a mark for CM Punk the way I'm a mark for Metallica. I might not love what I get, but I will always be into, like, Metallica's like releasing a new album. I'm like, oh, I'm in. I get myself juiced up. The returns might not always like pay off, but they'll always, Danzig too. Danzig, CM Punk, and Metallica. I will always be in on those 3 things. And he's one Bill Phil, dude. He's there's something about him that is special that makes you want to watch him. And is he like the most athletic, incredible wrestling performer these days? Not really, but there's something special about him. And I think that this can create the comeback story for one last run. Who knows? But
yeah, it's a good story. And, he'll be back by like September. So it'd be a good time to start it. And I get the feeling that you weren't too much of a avid WWE watcher before Punk came back. Would it be fair to say that Punk got you to watch WWE a bit more regularly since returning?
I pretty much fell off around the Ruthless Aggression era. I would pop in here and there. I was aware of it, but and actually what really got me before that for a while was the relaunch of ECW. It kind of like it got me. And I was stoked for a little while, and then it kind of fizzled out as the ECW brand started to really prove that it wasn't much of, it was WWE ECW. But that's what really got me, like, my attention sparked and my interest back into it. But yeah, before 2009, 2010, was just a casual watcher. Between maybe 2002, 2003 to 2009, that was my dark period.
So interesting, like CM Punk also is part of that ECW relaunch. So I feel like Punk has carried you through your WWE fandom, it seems.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. And, look, the Rumble is one thing, but we got to talk about the big elephant in the room, the insane story this week. I don't even know like how we should approach. This is a pretty laid back podcast. We're not a true crime podcast. We're not a political podcast, but this is a rock and wrestling podcast. And this is the biggest story in wrestling in quite a while, which is Vince McMahon, the founder of WWE, stepping down after crazy allegations of sexual assault, sexual trafficking. I don't even know if I want to get into the details. Like there's, you could read the court documents, but he's being sued by a woman who was formerly employed by WWE, who was recommended to him at a low point in her life when she had been taking care of her mother and father, who had just both died. And because she was so busy taking care of them, she couldn't work. She had to file for bankruptcy. She was in huge financial strain. And he was like, oh, I can get you a job. We could set you up with something at WWE, and essentially created a fake job for her and started coercing her and grooming her into sexual activity. And beyond just sexual activity with him, he started trafficking her to other employees at WWE, including former head of talent relations, John Laurinaitis, and just went on and would make her take pornographic photos, share them with other employees, he claimed. And then shockingly, there was one aspect where he was trying to re-sign a pro wrestler who was a former UFC champion and the only person that really fits that description is Brock Lesnar, and that he was promising as part of the contract negotiations that Brock would be able to sleep with this woman. Absolutely disgusting, bad power trip stuff. And certainly none of this has been proven in a court of law. You know, it's just her side of the story. But after having read the entire lawsuit with the amount of detail and like the dates and times and even just text message screenshots, it's very hard to think that this woman is lying. And even if you do take that position that like, oh, this was consensual, yeah, she didn't do anything against her will, which I do not believe. I think that this was forced. But even if you take that position, just looking at the text message screenshots in the lawsuit, which people have confirmed are very much in the writing style of Vince McMahon. It'd be very hard to fake those because you could just do a subpoena to your phone company. They could look them up. Just those text messages alone where he's arranging for her to have sex with other people or telling her that he owns her body, like that's enough to make him be a sex pest. I'm a bit of a gossip, so when I heard this, I was like, oh, I can't wait to read every detail about this. And then when I did go and read it, I regretted it. I thought like, oh, I feel so dirty. I feel so bad for this woman. I feel like I need a shower. This is so depraved. What were your feelings when you heard the news?
Sad. Sad for her, sad for this. It's just disgusted. And this is unfortunate to say, but like almost not surprised at the level of, what a piece of shit Vince McMahon proved or allegedly proved to be through these allegations. Just, you just hear these things and throughout the years, but I'm just glad that it's out in the open now. And through what is being, put out there with these allegations, she said that she hopes that the darkness is now kind of unveiled, and that if there's anyone who felt this way about, with these NDAs, because, NDAs do not shield from criminality. If there's crimes that were committed, the NDAs don't, shield from that. So she's hoping that these allegations and this lawsuit will then, help people that may have felt, kind of burdened by this to be able to come out. Just disgusted. And, I have a day job, and the TV was just on CNN all weekend. And it's just one of those things like, man, it's just heavy. It's just sad. And watching that press conference, I gotta say, Triple H did not handle that question well. I mean, I get it, and I probably wouldn't have handled it well either. It's just a weird situation to be in, and you're on the spot. But like his PR team did not do him a service by him basically saying like it was a great week in WWE. Let's focus on the positives. It's a good week for business, maybe, but like saying it's a great week, I'm
yeah. When you're the CEO and your father-in-law has to step down because of rape allegations, I don't think it's a good week. I think his choices of words were very, very poor. I agree with you completely. Like, I understand what he was attempting to do, but clearly he did not. Like, where's the crisis management team in WWE? Where's the publicity team to train him? Like, they should have had a statement prepared. And, look, I'm not saying I needed him to say much of anything at all. He could have certainly said, this is an active legal thing, but his company, the company of which he is an executive, is being sued because they're, it was ridiculous. It was completely tone deaf. And much like you, I have been watching a lot of the mainstream coverage of this. Obviously, I know the story in and out because I'm so fixated on the insanity of it, but watching mainstream coverage just to see how these mainstream outlets cover the story. And I would argue that Triple H made it significantly worse with these comments because all these stories focus on not only the terrible things that Vince did, but how much Triple H blew them off. In fact, there was this one piece on, I think the news outlet was News Nation. You could see it on YouTube, where they showed clips of Triple H at the press conference and clips of Cody at the press conference. And honestly, Cody, who is not an executive right now, came off way better than Triple H. He came off more professional in his response than Triple H did, which I think is a bad look. And in a way, it's also, I feel, indicative of how terrible the culture is at the company, and maybe they weren't taking this as seriously as they should have.
No, and that is something that one thing I will mention is that how shocking it was that Triple H just mentioned that he hadn't read the 67-page documents, and it's like just I was listening to Post Wrestling. Shout out to John Pollock. He was saying that, and this is an original thought, but he was saying that like you get that it's your father-in-law, and like that's a disgusting thing you don't want to read about, but at the same time, like you're in one of the heads of this company, you have to be aware of the criminality and the heinous crimes or the allegations of crimes and all just the terrible things that are happening in the culture, and to just like refuse to read that says a lot.
But even if he did refuse to read it, just the way he answered it was so flippant. He could have just been like, guys, it's been 2 days. I'm very much in the middle of one of the biggest shows of the year. We're still trying to put the pieces together. We'll have a more, a succinct answer for you in the coming days. Like that would have been 100% better than no, I didn't read it. Let's focus on the positive. Like
the casual nature of him saying that totally reminded me of when Stone Cold Steve Austin asked Vince McMahon, "Have you listened to the CM Punk podcast on Colt Cabana?" No, I haven't listened to that. It totally just reminded me of that. It was just like, no, the casual nature.
That's more excusable than this, that's just, there's no legal ramifications I guess there were after, but with the Punk podcast, but for Punk, not so much for Vince. Anyway, it's so gross. And I have a feeling that like, this isn't the last we've heard of this. This is one woman.
We thought,
like we know that he's already made, I believe, $14 million or $17 million in payments. Yeah. And this is only $3 million of those payments. So there's still plenty of NDA money out there. I have a feeling that more women will come out. WWE is way more in the public eye than they've been in a very long time. So I feel it leaves them exposed to more coverage like this. Whereas I saw something where a reporter, David Bixenspan, noted that in 2018 or 2019, 13 women allegedly came forward to the New York Times with some sort of claim against Vince McMahon. But because allegedly the reporter for the Times wasn't that familiar with pro wrestling, they got cold feet because they didn't feel like their story would be properly represented. And so they pulled out. So there's people out there. And, I don't really want to name any names, but you could do a little research on certain women and things that have been said after they've left. And, I feel like a reckoning is still coming for Vince and maybe more members of the WWE executive board.
And shout out to Bixenspan. I listened to his podcast, and he did an incredible job of covering what was called the Ring Boy scandal of the early 90s. And that's what kind of got into then the steroid scandal and all these things. If that Ring Boy scandal, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up, Google it. There's a lot of really detailed information, and you can listen to David Bixenspan and Chris Zellner's podcast on this very subject. It's really dark, and if that happened today, it would be a big story. But for some reason, it kind of just got swept under, and there's so many things like that Jimmy Snuka tried.
And that was a complete open secret, the Ring Boy thing. They were making jokes on the air on commentary about the announcer, Mel Phillips, who was accused of... Mel Phillips was a ring announcer for WB, and he'd also be in charge of these ring boys, who were these local interns, essentially, that would help set up the ring, and he would give them access for sexual favors, essentially. And it was a very open secret, which is just disgusting. As a wrestling fan, it's very embarrassing. More embarrassing than... a bad angle or anything like that, because already wrestling has this kind of stain on it as this lower class form of entertainment, which I don't see it as. But when stories like this surface, you can certainly understand the mainstream sentiment for it.
It's going to cast a really dark shadow on wrestling the way that the Benoit stuff did.
Yeah,
totally different, but it's the mainstream coverage of this incredibly dark thing And this is a lot of times when wrestling is, covered in mainstream media, it's like they show the wacky videos of Donald Trump getting stone cold stunned, and all these things. It's like, oh, pro wrestling. This is not that. This is like, very dark, very bad. And so it's heavy, man.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to end on such a bummer note. I'm curious, like to lighten the mood a little bit.
Yes.
And I'd like to know, what is some wrestling that is exciting you right now, or who's a wrestler who you're really into at the moment?
Is Swerve, man. I think that this is going to be the year, and we really watched. I got to watch, front row seats of him really coming up in indie wrestling with DEFY, and he was in CZW, and then in NXT, and they let him go, but I don't think that they saw as much potential as and now he's like super bulked up. He's with Nana. He's got the dance. He's killing it in that feud with Adam Page right now. I just think, man, I would love to see him as the first Black AEW champion, and just a champion. He's a musician. He's a podcaster. He calls himself a mogul. I'm all in on Swerve, man. If I would love to see him win that title.
I predict he's the next champion. I think he's going to be the next world champion. If not the next one, the one right after next. Like whoever, there might be a transition for Samoa Joe to somebody else, and then Swerve. But I think this year is his year for sure.
Swerve, and then I'm really enjoying Leo Rush. I hope to see him in the whether he goes back to AEW or WWE. It's awesome to see him kind of overcome adversity, overcome some injuries. I always love watching Leo Rush, and I mean I'm stoked to see what happens with Okada. That's going to be interesting. Like he's going to make a big difference wherever he goes, I think. And what do you see for Okada, man? And I'm going to turn this question on you because I'm curious what you think.
Because I feel like he's one of the rare wrestlers where I think he fits in both places. I could see him being a big star either place that he goes, WWE or AEW. I guess if I'm Okada, I think it would make more sense for him to go to WWE right now. And I say this as someone who likes AEW more, just because I think that AEW is very stuffed, especially at the top. They don't necessarily need him, or I don't know if he would be on TV every week. And I feel like WWE would understand that this is a major star, and he would get the AJ Styles treatment initially more so than the Nakamura treatment. However, I feel like based on what I'm reading, AEW is probably the more likely destination for him.
Really?
They're very competitive with their contract offer. And one thing I think that they offer that WWE doesn't offer is that they would allow him to stay in Japan and live in Japan. And Okada is married, and he just had a kid, and his wife is more famous than he is. She's a super famous, like, mainstream television star there. So I don't think she wants to leave. I think because of that, AEW has the advantage. But I have a feeling like we're going to find out very soon, by Revolution. If Okada's coming, he'll be on the next AEW pay-per-view. If not, then you know where we're going to see him. We're going to see him at WrestleMania. But I have a feeling he's going to go to AEW.
Hey, man, Okada, if you're watching, you got to stop by DEFY. Our current DEFY champion's Kenta. So we could see Kenta versus Okada.
Well, that would be great.
Okay. But man, yeah, that would be awesome to see. That's interesting that you put it that way, because I mean that makes sense. Why would he uproot the entire family? His wife, I didn't even know his wife was like a big television star in Japan.
Oh, yeah.
So that's cool. Okay, well then he probably doesn't even need to say goodbye to Japan, New Japan.
Right.
He didn't even need to do that. Then he could just come back whenever he wants.
Right, and that's the other thing. Like they I'm sure they would allow Okada to go do special shows in Japan.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Do you have any final plugs before we wind down the show?
Sure, man. You can listen to the interviews that I do. Just look up Metal Shop's Backstage Pass. Or if you can actually listen to Metal Shop anywhere on the Odyssey app and 99.9 KISW.com. You can listen to the Defiant ones. Shout out to DEFY, the whole DEFY team. Season 2 coming soon. And thank you very much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for entering the pit.